Marcus Stone stepped out of his silver Bentley, adjusting his designer suit as the morning sun hit the downtown Chicago streets. At 45, he had everything money could buy: a penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, a successful investment, firm, and more zeros in his bank account than he could count. But something felt empty, just like it had for the past 20 years. "Mr. Stone, your meeting with the board starts in 10 minutes. His assistant's voice crackled through his earpiece. "I'll be there shortly," Marcus replied, walking toward his office building. He needed his morning coffee first, the expensive kind from that fancy place around the corner that charged $8 for a cup. But fate had other plans that morning. As he turned the corner, the smell of grilled hot dogs and onions hit him. It wasn't the kind of breakfast he'd had in years, but it reminded him of someone. Then he saw her. Behind a small hot dog cart, wearing a clean but worn apron, stood Regina Williams. Her hair had some gray now, and life had left its marks on her face, but Marcus would recognize those eyes anywhere. They were the same ones he'd stared into during countless summer nights under the stars in their old neighborhood. Regina was busy serving a customer, her hands moving quickly as she prepared the hot dog with practiced ease. She hadn't noticed him yet, and Marcus felt his heart hammering in his chest like it used to when he was 17. "You want mustard on that, honey?" Regina asked her customer with a warm smile. That same smile that used to light up his world. 25 years. Ergo, Regina had been his everything. They'd grown up in the same poor neighborhood on the south side. She was the preacher's daughter, and he was the ambitious kid who promised he'd make it big someday. They'd been in love, the kind of love that made you believe anything was possible, until his scholarship to Harvard came through, until his parents pushed him to focus on his future, until Regina's father made it clear that his daughter deserved someone who would be there for her, not chasing dreams in another state. "Marcus?" Regina's voice snapped him back to the present. She'd finally noticed him, and her hot dog tongs hung suspended in midair. "Regina," he managed to say, his mouth suddenly dry. I didn't expect—" A car honked nearby, and Marcus realized he was standing in the middle of the sidewalk, blocking other pedestrians. His phone buzzed, probably his assistant wondering where he was. "You look good," Regina said, recovering her composure. She'd always been the stronger one. "Seems like you made it after all." The simple observation hit him like a punch to the gut. Yes, he'd made it. He had the money, the power, the success, everything he'd dreamed of back when they were young, everything except her. "How have you been?" he asked, knowing how inadequate the question was. "Oh, you know. Life happens," Regina answered, gesturing to her cart. "Been running this business for 15 years now. Put my kids through school with it." Kids, the word echoed in Marcus's head. Of course she'd had a life after him. Marriage, children, a whole world he knew nothing about. "Mr. Stone, the board is waiting," his assistant's voice interrupted again. "I have to go," Marcus said, hating every word. "But Regina—" "I'm here every day," she said simply, turning to serve another customer. Same corner, same hot dogs. Marcus walked away, but his feet felt heavy. The coffee he'd wanted was forgotten. His mind was 25 years in the past, remembering promises made under summer stars, dreams shared on front porches, and a love he'd convinced himself he had to leave behind. In his office, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows and expensive furniture, Marcus couldn't focus on the board meeting. All he could think about was Regina's cart on the corner, and how the smell of grilled onions had brought back every memory he'd spent years trying to forget. That night, alone in his penthouse, Marcus stood by the window, looking down at the city. Lights. He'd achieved everything he'd set out to do. He was successful, respected, wealthy. But seeing Regina today had shown him exactly what he'd lost along the way. His phone lit up with messages from his assistant about tomorrow's meetings, from business partners about deals and contracts. But all Marcus could think about was whether Regina still liked her hot dogs with extra mustard and no ketchup, just like she used to. The next morning, Marcus cancelled his breakfast meeting. For the first time in years, he arrived at work an hour late. His secretary, Linda, almost fell out of her chair when she saw him walking in with a hot dog in his hand. "Is everything all right, Mr. Stone?" Linda asked, her eyes wide with concern. In 15 years, she'd never seen him eat anything that wasn't served on fine china. "Everything's fine," Marcus replied, but his mind was still at that street corner. Regina had remembered exactly how he liked his hot dog, with extra mustard and sauerkraut. She hadn't said much while preparing it, but her hands had trembled slightly. Back in his office, Marcus found himself doing something he hadn't done in years. He opened Facebook and searched for Regina Williams. Her profile was simple, with just a few public photos. He saw pictures of two young women in graduation gowns, both with Regina's smile, her daughters. In one photo, Regina stood proudly between them, wearing the same apron he'd seen yesterday. There was no sign of a husband in any of the recent pictures. "Mr. Stone?" Linda's voice came through the intercom. "Mr. Phillips is here for your 10 o'clock. Marcus straightened his tie and closed the Facebook tab. He was one of Chicago's most successful businessmen. He had meetings to attend, deals to close. He couldn't spend his morning looking at old pictures, but by lunchtime his feet carried him back to Regina's corner." "Back so soon?" Regina asked, raising an eyebrow as she served another customer. "2 days in a row. Careful, or people might think you actually like hot dogs." "Maybe I do," Marcus replied, watching her work. She moved with the same grace she'd had in high school, when she used to help at her father's church suppers. "Regina, I was wondering—" "Daddy, can I have a hot dog?" A little boy's voice interrupted them. Marcus turned to see a woman in a business suit trying to hold back an excited child. "Sorry, honey, not today. We need to get to your doctor's appointment," the woman said. The little boy's face fell, and before Marcus knew what he was doing, he reached for his wallet. "Let me buy him one," he said to the mother. "I remember what it's like to want something and not be able to have it." Regina's eyes met his for a moment, and he knew she understood what he really meant. The mother tried to protest, but Marcus insisted. He watched as Regina prepared a hot dog for the boy, adding extra ketchup and a smile. The child's face lit up like it was Christmas morning. "You always had a good heart," Regina said softly after the mother and child left. "Even back then." "I don't know about that," Marcus replied, thinking about how he'd left her. "I made some pretty selfish choices." Regina wiped her hands on her apron. "We were kids, Marcus. You had dreams. Big dreams. And you didn't?" The question hung between them like a heavy curtain. Regina turned to adjust the temperature on her grill, but Marcus saw her shoulders tense. "My dreams were different," she finally said. "Simpler, maybe. But I achieved them. My girls both finished college. Jasmine's a teacher now, and Tracy's in medical school." Pride filled her voice, and Marcus felt a strange mix of happiness and regret. He should have been there, could have been there. "Regina, would you have dinner with me?" The words tumbled out before he could stop them. "Just to catch up, for old time's sake." Regina looked at him for a long moment. The same look she used to give him when she was trying to figure out if he was being serious about something. "I don't know, Marcus," she said finally. "That's a lot of years to catch up on." "Please," he said, and he heard the desperate edge in his voice. "Just dinner. Had that little Italian place on Monroe Street, if it's still there. Antonio's?" A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "It's still there. Some things don't change. Is that a yes?" Regina sighed, but he could see she was fighting back a bigger smile. "Friday at 7. Don't be late. Some things shouldn't change." Back at his office, Marcus couldn't stop smiling. Linda looked at him like he'd grown a second head when he started humming while reviewing contracts. That afternoon, his phone buzzed with a message from Charlotte, the socialite he'd been casually dating for the past few months. She wanted to know if he was free for dinner at the new French restaurant everyone was talking about. Marcus stared at the message for a long time before replying that he had other plans. Charlotte wouldn't understand. How could she? She lived in a world of charity galas and designer clothes. She wouldn't understand the simple perfection of a hot dog cart on a street corner, or the way some loves never really die, they just wait, quietly in your heart for 25 years. That night, Marcus found himself driving past Regina's old neighborhood. The houses were more worn now, the streets a little rougher. But the church where her father used to preach was still there. its white steeple reaching toward the sky like a finger, pointing to all the dreams they once had. He wondered if Regina still lived around here, if she still sang in the choir on Merci. Sundays. If she ever told her daughters about the boy who used to climb up to her window just to give her a goodnight kiss. Friday suddenly felt very far away. Friday came faster than Marcus expected. He spent an hour choosing what to wear, finally settling on a casual suit without a tie. He didn't want to remind Regina too much of the wealthy businessman he'd become. Tonight, he just wanted to be the Marcus she used to know. But life had other plans. Just as he was about to leave his office, his phone rang. It was Jeffrey Phillips, his biggest client. "Marcus, we have a situation," Jeffrey said, his voice tense. "The merger we've been working on, someone's trying to block it. They've called an emergency board meeting. We need you here now." Marcus looked at his watch. 6:30. He could make it to Antonio's by 7 if he left right now. "Jeff, I have a very important personal commitment tonight," Marcus started to say. "More important than $50 million. Jeffrey cut in. "Marcus, I need my best man on this. You're the only one who can fix this mess." 25 years ago, Marcus had made a choice between his ambitions and Regina. Now here he was again, facing the same decision. He picked up his phone to call Antonio's, hoping to reach Regina. But he didn't have her number. She was probably already on her way there, wearing something special, maybe feeling nervous just like him. "Give me an hour," Marcus told Jeffrey. "I'll stop by Antonio's to explain the situation, then I'll come to the meeting." But Chicago traffic had other ideas. A major accident on Lakeshore Drive turned the usually quick drive into a nightmare. Marcus sat in his Bentley, watching the minutes tick by on his expensive watch. 7 o'clock came and went. At Antonio's, Regina sat at a corner table, wearing a simple blue dress she'd bought specially for tonight. She'd even let her daughter Tracy do her makeup. Every time the door opened, her heart jumped a little. 7:30 came and went. The waiter stopped by her table for the 4th time. "Would you like to order now, ma'am?" Regina smiled politely and asked for more water. Her hands played with the paper napkin, twisting it into tiny shapes like she used to do when she was nervous in high school. 8 o'clock. The same couples who had arrived after her were now paying their bills and leaving. The waiters pitying. Looks were getting harder to ignore. Meanwhile, Marcus was stuck in the board meeting, watching his phone light up with messages from Charlotte. She'd somehow found out he was having dinner with some hot dog vendor and was not happy about it. "Marcus, are you with us?" Jeffrey's voice snapped him back to attention. "This is important. Important. Everything in his life for the past 25 years had been important. Meetings, deals, mergers, acquisitions. But sitting in that conference room, all Marcus could think about was Regina sitting alone at Antonio's, probably thinking history was repeating itself. At 9:15, Regina finally stood up. She'd been stood up before, but not in many years, and never quite like this. As she walked out of Antonio's, she wondered why she'd even said yes. People like Marcus Stone didn't have dinner with hot dog vendors. She was halfway to the bus stop when she heard someone calling her name. "Regina, wait!" Marcus was running down the street, his expensive suit wrinkled, his face flushed. He looked nothing like the polished businessman she'd seen earlier that week. "I can explain," he started, but Regina held up her hand. "No need," she said quietly. "Some things really don't change, do they, Marcus?" "Regina, please. There was an emergency board meeting. $50 million were at stake. I tried to come sooner, I got stuck in traffic. There's always something bigger, isn't there?" Regina's voice was tired. "Always something more important." "You're important," Marcus said, taking a step toward her. "Am I?" Regina looked at him, really looked at him. 25 years ago, you chose your future over us, and tonight, you made the same choice again." "That's not fair," Marcus protested. "I'm here now." "Yes, 3 hours late." Regina shook her head. "You know what I was doing 3 hours ago? Sitting in that restaurant, watching happy couples enjoy their dinner, making excuses to the waiter, feeling like that 17-year-old girl all over again. The one who wasn't quite good enough to fit into your big plans." Marcus felt like she'd slapped him. "That's not how it was, wasn't it?" Regina started walking again. "Go back to your board meeting, Marcus. Go back to your perfect life with your perfect suits and your perfect girlfriend. How do you know about Charlotte? Regina smiled sadly. The ladies who come to my cart love to gossip about Chicago's most eligible bachelor, about the society parties, the charity events, the beautiful women. That's your world now. It was never mine. Regina, please, give me another chance. Let me make it up to you. She turned to look at him one last time. You know what's funny? All these years I told myself you left because you had bigger dreams, important things to do, but standing here now, I realize maybe I was the one who dodged a bullet. Because I may just be a hot dog vendor, Marcus, but at least I know what's really important in life. With that, she walked away, leaving Marcus standing alone on the street, just like he'd left her standing alone 25 years ago. The next morning, Regina's hot dog cart wasn't on its usual corner. Marcus stood there in the early morning, light, his coffee getting cold in his hand, wondering if he'd finally managed to chase away the only woman he'd ever truly loved. Twice. Looking for Regina? Asked Tom, the newspaper vendor who worked the same corner. She called in sick today, first time in 15 years. Marcus's stomach twisted with guilt. He'd done this. Again. Back in his office, he couldn't focus on anything. The merger deal he'd sacrificed his dinner with Regina for was going through smoothly now, but it felt hollow. Jeffrey Phillips was thrilled, talking about millions in profits, but Marcus kept seeing Regina's face as she walked away last night. Mr. Stone, Linda poked her head in. Miss Charlotte is here to see you. Before Marcus could respond, Charlotte swept into his office in a cloud of expensive perfume and designer clothes. Her red hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. She looked exactly like the kind of woman everyone expected Marcus Stone to date. Darling, we need to talk about this little situation, Charlotte said, perching herself on his desk. I understand you're having some sort of midlife crisis, but really, a hot dog vendor. Marcus felt something snap inside him. Her name is Regina. Whatever, Charlotte waved her hand dismissively. The point is, you're Marcus Stone. You have a reputation to maintain. What will people think? I don't care what people think, Marcus said, standing up. For the first time in years, he really meant it. Don't be ridiculous, Charlotte laughed, but it wasn't a kind sound. Of course you care. You've spent 25 years building this life, this image. You're not going to throw it all away for some woman from your past who sells hot dogs on the street. Marcus looked around his office, at the expensive art on the walls, the view of the city, all the trappings of success he'd worked so hard for. Then he thought about Regina's smile, about how she remembered exactly how he liked his hot dogs, about the pride in her voice when she talked about putting her daughters through college. You're right about one thing, Charlotte, he said quietly. I've spent 25 years building this life. And you know what? I'm not happy. I haven't been happy for a very long time. Marcus, you're not thinking clearly. Charlotte stood up, her perfect smile faltering. Maybe we should take a trip, get away from all this for a while. I hear the south of France is lovely this time of year. But Marcus wasn't listening anymore. He was looking at the framed magazine, cover on his wall. Chicago Business Monthly's Man of the Year issue with his face on it. He'd been so proud when it came out. Now all he could see was how tired his eyes looked, how forced his smile was. I have to go, he said, grabbing his jacket. Go, where? We're not done discussing this. Yes, we are, Marcus turned to face her. We're done discussing everything, Charlotte. We're done, period. He left her standing in his office, ignoring her calls behind him. In the elevator, he loosened his tie and pulled out his phone. After a few calls to his contacts, he had Regina's address. The neighborhood hadn't changed much since they were young. The same small houses, the same cracked sidewalks. Regina's house was a modest two-story with flower boxes in the windows and a small, well-kept garden. Marcus sat in his car for a long time, wondering if he had any right to be here. A young woman who looked just like Regina did at 18 came out of the house carrying a backpack. One of her daughters, he guessed. The young woman noticed his car and frowned, then went back inside. A few minutes later, Regina came out. She was wearing jeans and a simple t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. Even like this, especially like this, she was more beautiful to him than Charlotte had ever been. She walked to his car and waited until he rolled down the window. Are you planning to sit out here all day? She asked. I wasn't sure you'd want to see me, Marcus admitted. I don't, Regina said, but there was something in her voice that gave him hope. But my daughter Tracy thinks you're either a stalker or a lost puppy, and either way we should probably deal with it. I'm sorry about last night, Marcus said. I'm sorry about 25 years ago. I'm sorry about everything. Regina crossed her arms. You said that last night. I know, but I need to say it again. And I need to say something else too. Marcus got out of his car, not caring that his expensive shoes were getting dusty on the unpaved driveway. I need to tell you that leaving you was the biggest mistake of my life, that I've thought about you every day for 25 years, that seeing you again has made me realize how empty my life has been without you. Marcus, Regina started, but he held up his hand. Please let me finish. I just broke up with Charlotte. I walked out of my office in the middle of the day. I don't care about my reputation or what people will think. I care about you. I care about the fact that you remember how I like my hot dogs, that you put your daughters through college on your own, that you still have the same smile that used to make my heart stop when we were 17. A neighbor walking her dog slowed down to watch them, but Marcus didn't care. I know I don't deserve another chance, he continued. I know I've hurt you twice now, but I'm standing here asking for one anyway, because 25 years ago, I chose wrong. I chose success and money and status, and all it got me was an empty penthouse and a life full of people who only care about what I can do for them. Regina uncrossed her arms slowly. You can't just walk back into my life and expect everything to be okay. I know, Marcus said. I know it won't be easy. I know we've both changed. But some things haven't changed, Regina. The way I feel about you hasn't changed. Tracy watched from the window as her mother talked to the man in the expensive suit. She'd never seen him before, but she recognized him from the business magazines. Marcus Stone, the millionaire everyone talked about. Who's that man talking to Mom? Jasmine asked, joining her sister at the window. At 24, Jasmine was the older of the two, a third-grade teacher at the local elementary school. I don't know, but he's been sitting in that fancy car for almost an hour, Tracy replied. Mom seems to know him, though. Outside, Regina felt her resolve weakening. Marcus looked so sincere, so different from the polished businessman she'd seen in the newspapers over the years. For a moment, she could see the boy she'd fallen in love with, the one who used to bring her wildflowers and write her poetry. You can't just fix everything with pretty words, Marcus, she said, but her voice was softer now. Then let me fix it with actions, he replied. Give me a chance to show you I've changed, that I finally know what's really important. Before Regina could answer, her phone rang. It was her supplier. There was a problem with tomorrow's delivery. I have to take this, she said, stepping away. It's about work. Marcus watched as she handled the call, efficiently solving whatever problem had come up. This was a different Regina from the girl he'd known, stronger, more confident. He realized he had a lot to learn about who she'd become. Mom, Tracy called from the porch. Grandpa's on the phone. He wants to know if you're coming to Sunday dinner. Regina's father. Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. Reverend Williams had never approved of him, even back then. He'd said Marcus was too ambitious, too focused on getting out of their neighborhood. Turns out he'd been right. Tell him I'll call him back, honey, Regina called to her daughter. She turned back to Marcus. I should go inside. Have dinner with me, Marcus said quickly. Not at some fancy restaurant. Here in your home, let me cook for you and your daughters. Regina raised an eyebrow. You cook? No, Marcus admitted with a small laugh. But I can learn. Or I can bring takeout from that Chinese place you used. To Love, if it's still there. Golden Dragon? Regina couldn't help smiling. It's still there. Still has those spring rolls you used to say were better than any fancy restaurants. Tomorrow night? Marcus asked hopefully. I promise I won't. Be late this time. No board meetings, no emergencies, no excuses. Regina looked at her house where her daughters were pretending not to watch from the window. My girls should be there, Marcus finished for her. I want to meet them. I want to know everything about your life, Regina. Everything I missed. Then Marcus's phone started ringing. Regina tensed, expecting him to take the call. Instead, he pulled out the phone, turned it off, and put it back in his pocket. "See?" he said. "I'm learning." Regina felt something warm spread through her chest. "Tomorrow at 6, she said finally. "Don't forget the extra sweet and sour sauce." Marcus's face lit up like a kid at Christmas. "I'll be here, on time, with extra everything." As he drove away, Regina stood in her driveway for a long moment. Her daughters came rushing out as soon as his car turned the corner. "Mom, was that really Marcus Stone?" Tracy asked, her eyes wide. "The Marcus Stone?" "How do you know him?" Jasmine added. "Why was he here?" Regina looked at her daughters, her beautiful, accomplished daughters who'd grown up without a father, but never lacked for love. They deserved to know the truth. "Let's go inside," she said. "I need to tell you girls a story about a boy I used to love a long time ago." Inside, over cups of coffee, Regina told her daughters everything. About young love and big dreams, about choices and consequences, about how life doesn't always go the way you plan. "So he's the one," Jasmine said quietly when Regina finished. "The one in that old photo you keep in your bedside table?" Regina nodded. She'd kept only one picture of Marcus, a faded Polaroid from their senior prom. She'd been wearing a borrowed dress, and he'd been wearing a rented tux. They'd been so young, so full of dreams. "Are you going to give him another chance?" Tracy asked. She was studying to be a doctor, always analyzing everything, looking for the right diagnosis. "I don't know," Regina admitted. "He hurt me twice." "But you still love him," Jasmine said. It wasn't a question. Regina looked at her daughters, wondering when they'd gotten so wise. Sometimes love isn't enough, and sometimes it's everything. Tracy countered. "Mum, we've seen you work so hard all our lives. You deserve to be happy." "I am happy," Regina protested. "I have you girls, my business." "But you've never let anyone get close," Jasmine pointed out. "All these years, whenever someone showed interest, you always had a reason why it wouldn't work." Regina hadn't realized her daughters had noticed that. She thought she'd hidden it better. "Maybe it's because your heart was still with him," Tracy suggested gently. Regina got up to clear, the coffee cups, needing a moment to compose herself. Her daughters were right. She'd never let anyone else in. Not really. She'd told herself it was because she was too busy, too focused on raising her girls and running her business. But maybe, just maybe, it was because no one else had ever measured up to the memory of a boy who used to bring her wildflowers and write her poetry. The next day, Charlotte made sure everyone in Chicago's high society knew about Marcus Stone's mental breakdown. She told anyone who would listen about how he'd walked out of his office in the middle of the day to chase after some hot dog vendor from his past. "He's clearly having some sort of crisis," she told her friends over lunch at the city's most exclusive restaurant. "I mean, throwing away everything we had for someone like that? It's tragic, really." But Marcus didn't care about the gossip. He spent the morning in his penthouse kitchen watching cooking videos on YouTube. After 3 failed attempts at making spring rolls, he finally admitted defeat and called Golden Dragon to place an order. Meanwhile, Regina was nervous at her hot dog cart. Her regular customers noticed she seemed distracted, almost burning several hot dogs, something she'd never done before. "Everything okay, Regina?" asked Bill, a construction worker who'd been buying his lunch from her for 10 years. "Just thinking about tonight," she admitted, fixing his usual order. "Extra onions, no relish." "Hot date?" Bill teased. Regina felt herself blushing like a teenager. "Not exactly, just dinner with an old friend." At 5 o'clock, Regina closed her cart early for the first time in years. She wanted time to get ready, though she told herself it was silly to be so nervous about dinner in her own home. Her daughters helped her get ready. Tracy insisted on doing her makeup again, while Jasmine helped her choose what to wear. "The blue sweater," Jasmine decided. "It brings out your eyes." "This is just dinner," Regina protested, but she put on the sweater anyway. At exactly 5:55, a knock came at the door. Marcus stood there, his arms full of bags from Golden Dragon, wearing jeans and a casual shirt instead of his usual suit. "You look beautiful," he said when Regina opened the door, and she could hear the sincerity in his voice. "Come in," she said, trying to ignore the butterflies in her stomach. "Girls, come help with these bags." Tracy and Jasmine came into the living room, both trying not to stare too obviously at Marcus. He smiled at them warmly. "You must be Tracy and Jasmine," he said. "Your mother told me you're a teacher and a medical student. She's very proud of you both. And you're the boy from the prom photo," Tracy said directly, making Regina want to sink into the floor. But Marcus just smiled. "Yes, I am, though I was a fool back then. Still am sometimes." They set up dinner on the small dining table, and Regina was surprised to see Marcus had remembered everyone's favorites from the old days, including her love for extra sweet and sour sauce. "Mom said you used to write her poetry," Jasmine said as they ate. Marcus nearly choked on his spring roll. "She told you about that?" "She told us everything," Tracy said. "It's about how you were her first love, how you left for Harvard, how you met again at her hot dog cart." "Girls," Regina warned, but Marcus held up his hand. "No, it's okay," he said. "They should know. They should know that I made the biggest mistake of my life when I left your mother, that I thought success meant making money and having power. But looking at you two, seeing what your mother accomplished on her own, that's real success." The girls exchanged looks. This wasn't what they'd expected from a millionaire businessman. "Why did you really come back?" Tracy asked. Her future. Doctor's instincts making her probe deeper. Marcus put down his chopsticks and looked at Regina. "Because for 25 years, I've been living half a life. I've had everything money can buy, but nothing that really matters. Seeing your mother again, it was like waking up from a very long dream." Regina felt tears pricking at her eyes. "Marcus, no, let me finish," he said gently. "When I saw you at that hot dog cart, I realized something. All these years, I've been chasing something I already had and threw away. Real love. The kind that remembers how you like your hot dogs after 25 years. The kind that makes you a better person just by being near it." Jasmine wiped a tear from her eye, trying to hide it. Tracy pretended to be very interested in her fried rice. "I'm not asking for everything to go back to how it was," Marcus continued. "I know too much time has passed, but I'm asking for a chance to be part of your life again. All of your lives," he added, looking at the girls. Regina looked at her daughters, then back at Marcus. "It won't be easy," she said softly. "I'm not that starry-eyed girl anymore. And I'm not that ambitious boy who thought money was everything," Marcus replied. "But maybe that's good. Maybe we needed to grow up to really appreciate what we had." Just then Marcus's phone buzzed. Everyone tensed, but he didn't even look at it. "That's probably Charlotte," he said calmly. "She's been telling everyone I'm having a breakdown. Apparently choosing love over money means I must be crazy." "Are you?" Regina asked. "Crazy?" Marcus reached across the table and took her hand. "If caring about you more than my reputation makes me crazy, then yes, I'm completely insane." Tracy and Jasmine exchanged another look, trying to hide their smiles. "Mom," Jasmine said softly, "remember what you always told us, that sometimes God gives you a second chance because he thinks you're ready for it now?" Regina looked at her daughter, then at Marcus's hand holding hers. She thought about all the years that had passed, all the changes they'd both gone through. Maybe they had needed that time. Maybe they'd needed to become different people to find their way back to each other. The next morning, Regina's cart was back on its usual corner, but this time Marcus was there too, wearing jeans and a casual shirt, helping her set up. "You don't have to do this," Regina said, watching him struggle with the umbrella. "I want to," Marcus replied, finally getting it right. "I want to know everything about your life." Their customers were surprised to see Chicago's famous businessman serving hot dogs alongside Regina. Some recognized him from the newspapers and business magazines, but he served them all with a smile, even though he kept mixing up the mustard and the relish. "You're terrible at this," Regina laughed after he accidentally gave a customer sauerkraut instead of onions. "I'll learn," Marcus promised, and the way he looked at her made her heart skip a beat. But not everyone was happy about this new development. Charlotte had been busy. By lunchtime, several reporters showed up, cameras ready. "Mr. Stone, is it true you're having a nervous breakdown?" "Mr. Stone, have you really given up your position at Stone Enterprises?" "Mr. Stone, what does your family Think about your relationship with a street vendor. Marcus stepped in front of Regina protectively, but she moved beside him instead. I can handle myself, she said quietly. Then to the reporters, yes, I sell hot dogs. I've put 2 daughters through college doing it. What else would you like to know? The reporters were taken aback by her confidence. One of them, a young woman, stepped forward. Ms. Williams, how does it feel to have one of Chicago's wealthiest men working at your hot dog cart? Regina smiled. Honestly, he's not very good at it, but he's trying, and that means more than all his money ever could. The story ran in all the papers the next day, but instead of the scandal Charlotte had hoped for, it became a love story. People loved the idea of the millionaire and the hot dog vendor finding their way back to each other after 25 years, but not everyone was charmed. That afternoon, a sleek black car pulled up to Regina's cart. A distinguished-looking older man stepped out. Marcus's father, Richard Stone. So this is where my son has been wasting his time, he said, looking around with distaste. Dad, Marcus said, his voice tense. What are you doing here? Trying to stop you from destroying everything we've built, Richard replied. Do you have any idea what you're doing to our company's reputation? Our family's name? Regina started to step away, but Marcus caught her hand. I'm not going anywhere, he said firmly. Not this time. Don't be ridiculous, Marcus, Richard snapped. You have responsibilities. The company needs you. The board is meeting tomorrow to discuss the Phillips merger. The company will be fine, Marcus said. I'm still CEO. I'm still handling all the important decisions. I'm just choosing to spend my free time differently now. With her. Richard looked at Regina like she was something stuck to his shoe. Son, I understand if you're going through something. Midlife crisis, perhaps we can deal with that privately. But this public spectacle has to stop. Regina squeezed Marcus's hand. Maybe I should give you two some privacy. No, Marcus said, firmly. Anything he has to say, he can say in front of you. He turned to his father. Dad, do you know why I've never been married? Why none of my relationships have lasted? Because for 25 years I've been comparing every woman I met to Regina. And none of them ever measured up. She's a hot dog vendor, Richard said, as if that explained everything. She's the woman I love, Marcus replied. The woman I should have chosen 25 years ago when you and Mom pushed me to focus on my career instead of my heart. We wanted what was best for you. No, Marcus shook his head. You wanted what was best for the family name, for the company. Well, guess what? I've spent 25 years being exactly who you wanted me to be. Now it's time for me to be who I want to be. A small crowd had gathered, watching the drama unfold. Regina's regular customers stood protectively nearby, ready to support her if needed. You're making a mistake, Richard said quietly. One that will cost you everything. No, Dad. My mistake was letting you convince me that money and status were more important than love. I won't make that mistake again. Richard looked at his son for a long moment, then at Regina. Something in his expression shifted slightly. You really love her? He asked, his voice softer. More than anything, Marcus replied without hesitation. Richard straightened his tie, his face unreadable. Your mother will want to meet her, he said finally. Sunday dinner. Don't be late. With that, he turned and walked back to his car, leaving Marcus and Regina standing there, still holding hands. Are you sure about this? Regina asked. Your father has to accept that I'm not that scared young man anymore, Marcus finished. I'm not letting anyone come between us again. Not my family, not society, not anyone. Regina looked at their joined hands, then at the crowd of supportive customers, then at Marcus's father's retreating car. Sunday dinner with your parents, she said slowly. That's a big step, Marcus smiled. Scared. Terrified, Regina admitted. But you faced down the press for me. I can face your mother for you. Just be yourself, Marcus said, pulling her close. That's who I fell in love with, both times. Sunday came too quickly. Regina stood in front of her mirror, trying to decide what to wear to dinner at the Stone mansion. Her daughters had taken her shopping the day before, insisting she needed something special for the occasion. The green dress, Tracy said, holding it up. It makes you look like a queen. I don't want to look like a queen, Regina sighed. I just want to look good enough. Good enough for what? Jasmine asked sharply. "Mum, you've never been just good enough. You're amazing. And if Marcus's family can't see that, it's their loss." The doorbell rang at exactly 4 o'clock. Marcus stood there in a suit, holding a bouquet of wildflowers, just like he used to when they were young. "You look beautiful," he said, his eyes shining. "The dress is perfect." "Your mother is going to hate it," Regina worried, smoothing the fabric. "My mother is going to hate everything at first," Marcus said honestly, "but she'll come around just like Dad is starting to." The drive to the stone mansion was quiet. Regina watched the neighborhoods change, getting more and more exclusive until they turned into a gated community where every house looked like a small palace. "You grew up here?" she asked, looking at the manicured lawns and fountain-decorated driveways. "No," Marcus smiled. "I grew up in the same neighborhood you did. My parents moved here after I went to Harvard, after the company really took off." The stone mansion was at the end of a long driveway. A butler opened the door and Regina felt like she'd stepped into another world. Marcus, darling, a tall, elegant woman in her 70s, came sweeping down the grand staircase. Eleanor Stone was exactly what Regina had imagined. Perfectly coiffed silver hair, designer clothes, and a pearl necklace that probably cost more than Regina's house. "Mother," Marcus kissed her cheek. "This is Regina." Eleanor's eyes swept over Regina, taking in everything from her new dress to her worn purse. "How nice to meet you." Richard Stone appeared from his study, looking uncomfortable but less hostile than he had at the hot dog cart. "Regina," he nodded, "welcome to our home." The butler led them to a formal dining room that could have fit Regina's entire first floor. The table was set with china and crystal that made Regina afraid to touch anything. "So, Regina," Eleanor said, as the first course was served, "Marcus tells us you run your own business?" Regina sat up straighter. "Yes, I do, for 15 years. Now, a hot dog cart," Eleanor said, making it sound like Regina sold trash on the street. "How enterprising." "Very enterprising," Marcus cut in. "Regina put both her daughters through college with that business. Jasmine's a teacher now, and Tracy's in medical school." Eleanor's eyebrows rose slightly. "Medical school, really?" "Yes," Regina said proudly. "Tracy's top of her class at Northwestern." "Northwestern?" Richard looked up from his soup. "That's a fine school." "It is," Regina agreed. "She worked very hard to get in. Both my girls did. We might not have had much money, but they never let that stop them." "And their father?" Eleanor asked delicately. "Is he in the picture?" "Mother," Marcus warned, but Regina touched his arm. "No, it's okay," she said. "Their father left when the girls were very young, said he wasn't ready for the responsibility, but it turned out to be a blessing. My girls grew up seeing that a woman can be strong on her own, that she doesn't need a man to take care of her." Eleanor's spoon clattered against her bowl. "Are you suggesting that's your intention with my son, to prove you don't need him?" "Mom," Marcus protested. "No," Regina said calmly. "I don't need Marcus, I want him. There's a big difference. I've spent 25 years building a life I'm proud of. I'm not here for his money or his status. I'm here because somehow, after all these years, we still love each other." Richard Stone put down his spoon, studying Regina with new interest. "You know," he said slowly, "when Marcus was young, before Harvard, he used to talk about a girl who made him want to be better, who believed in him before anyone else did. Was that you?" Regina nodded, surprised by the question. "She used to help me study," Marcus added softly. "She'd quiz me for hours, even though she was tired from working at her father's church. She always said I could do anything I set my mind to. And look at you now," Regina smiled. "You did it all just like I knew you would." "No," Marcus shook his head. "I did what everyone else wanted me to do. You're the one who really succeeded. You raised 2 amazing daughters. You built a business from nothing. You stayed true to yourself." Helena watched this exchange, her expression softening almost imperceptibly. "Tell me about your daughters," she said finally. "What made them choose teaching and medicine?" As Regina talked about her girls, the atmosphere in the room began to change. Richard asked questions about her business model. Eleanor seemed genuinely impressed by Tracy's medical school achievements. By dessert, Eleanor was showing Regina old photos of Marcus as a child, and Richard was telling stories about Marcus's first attempts at running the company. He was so serious all the time, Richard chuckled, always trying to prove himself. He was like that in high school too, Regina smiled, always studying, always planning. Until he met you, Eleanor said unexpectedly. I remember now. Oh yeah, before Harvard he smiled more. He seemed lighter. Marcus reached for Regina's hand under the table. I was happier then, he said simply, and I'm happier now. Eleanor looked at their joined hands, then at her husband. Something passed between them, years of shared understanding, of wanting the best for their only child. Well, Eleanor said, finally, I suppose we'll need 2 more place settings for Christmas dinner. For your daughters, Regina, that is, if you'll all join us. Regina felt tears prick at her eyes. We'd be honored, she said softly. Later, as they drove home, Marcus kept glancing at her with a grin. What? She asked. You charmed them, he said proudly, just by being yourself. Your mother still thinks I'm not good enough for you. Maybe, Marcus admitted, but she's starting to see what I've always known, that you're exactly what I need. The weeks that followed were like a dream. Marcus split his time between his office and Regina's hot dog cart, learning the business from the ground up. His expensive suits were replaced by casual clothes, and his perfect manicure got ruined by mustard stains and onion juice. But he'd never been happier. The press had a field day with the story. Millionaire trades boardroom for hot dogs read. One headline. Love conquers class divide, proclaimed another. But what really caught everyone's attention was how the business world reacted to the change in Marcus Stone. He's different now, Jeffrey Phillips told reporters after a board meeting. More human somehow. The deals he's making aren't just about profit anymore. They're about building something meaningful. Even Charlotte had to admit defeat. She'd tried to spread rumors about Marcus having a breakdown, but nobody believed her anymore. Not when they saw how he looked at Regina, or how she made him laugh in a way no one had seen before. But not everything was perfect. One morning, Regina arrived at her usual corner to find her cart vandalized. The windows were broken, and someone had spray-painted "Gold Digger" across the side. Marcus was furious when he saw it. I'll find out who did this, he promised already, pulling out his phone to call security. No, Regina said firmly, pulling out her cleaning supplies. This is how I've handled problems for 15 years, by facing them head-on and cleaning up the mess myself. So they cleaned together. Marcus's expensive watch got scratched from scrubbing paint, but he didn't care. By the time they finished, the cart looked almost new again. You know what this means, don't you? Regina asked as they served their first customer of the day. That someone's jealous, Marcus guessed. That people are always going to talk, Regina corrected him. They're always going to judge. Are you sure you're ready for that? Marcus looked at her, his hands covered in mustard, his former life of luxury seeming like a distant memory. I've never been more sure of anything. That night, they had dinner at Regina's house with her daughters. Tracy was showing them her medical school textbooks, explaining complicated procedures with enthusiasm, when there was a knock at the door. It was Reverend Williams, Regina's father. Daddy? Regina stood up, surprised. Her father rarely made unannounced visits. The old preacher stood in the doorway, looking tired but determined, his eyes fixed on Marcus. I saw what happened to Regina's cart on the news, he said, and I saw how you helped her clean it up. Marcus stood up straighter. He remembered how this man had once told him he wasn't good enough for his daughter. 25 years ago, Reverend Williams continued, I told you that you were too focused on getting out, on making it big. I said you'd break my daughter's heart. You were right, Marcus admitted. Maybe, the Reverend nodded. But maybe I was wrong too. The Marcus Stone I see now, the one who cleans graffiti off a hot dog cart, who makes my daughter smile again. He's a different man. Regina moved to stand beside Marcus, taking his hand. I came to say I'm sorry, Reverend. Williams said, to both of you. Sometimes God's plans take longer than we expect to understand. Marcus felt something tight in his chest release, something he hadn't even known was there. Regina was crying softly beside him. Would you stay for dinner, Daddy? She asked. Tracy was just telling us about her cardiology rotation. The Reverend smiled. I'd like that. As they sat around Regina's small dining table, the millionaire, the hot dog vendor, the preacher, and the two accomplished daughters, Marcus looked at their mixed-matched plates and worn tablecloth and realized he'd never had a more perfect meal at any five-star restaurant. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, Marcus and Regina sat on her front porch swing, just like they used to do as teenagers. Your father's blessing means a lot, Marcus said softly. It does, Regina agreed. But you know what means more? The fact that you didn't need it. That you chose me anyway. Marcus pulled her closer. I should have chosen you back then. No. Regina shook her head. We weren't ready then. You needed to become who you are, and I needed to become who I am. Sometimes the longest road is the right one. A car drove by slowly, one of Charlotte's friends, probably hoping to catch some gossip. But Regina and Marcus didn't care anymore. Let them look, let them talk. I've been thinking, Marcus said after a while, about the future. Oh? Regina tried to keep her voice casual, but her heart started beating faster. What would you think about expanding your business? Not changing it, just growing it. Food trucks maybe, or small restaurants. Still your recipes, your way of doing things, but bigger. Regina sat up looking at him. You want to invest in my hot dog business? Only if you want to, Marcus said quickly, and only as a silent partner. You'd still be in charge. I see how many people you make happy. Every day, how many lives you touch. Maybe more people should have that. Regina thought about it. She'd always dreamed of expanding, but never had the capital. You really want to be the hot dog king of Chicago? Marcus laughed. I want to be whatever you need me to be. Partner, investor, hot dog apprentice. As long as I'm with you, I don't care what people call me. 1 year later, Regina stood in front of her hot dog cart, but it wasn't just any ordinary day. The cart had been decorated with white flowers and ribbons, and a small crowd had gathered around it. Are you sure about this? Tracy asked, adjusting her mother's simple white dress. I've never been more sure, Regina smiled, looking at the cart that had changed her life twice now. Marcus stood nearby, handsome in a suit that cost less than his old ones, but somehow made him look happier. His parents were there too, Eleanor. Stone actually wearing casual clothes for once, and Richard Stone looking proudly at his son. Only you two would get married at a hot dog cart, Jasmine laughed, but her eyes were full of tears. It had been Marcus's idea. This is where we found each other again, he'd said. This is where I finally got my priorities straight. Where else would we get married? Regina's regular customers had all come, standing alongside Chicago's elite business people. Bill, the construction worker, chatted with Jeffrey Phillips about the stock market. Tom, the newspaper vendor, shared stories about Regina with Eleanor Stone. Reverend Williams stepped forward, ready to perform the ceremony. The same man who had once warned Marcus to stay away from his daughter was now going to marry them. 25 years ago, the Reverend began, these two young people stood at a crossroads. They chose different paths then, but God in his wisdom brought them back together, right here, at this humble hot dog cart. Charlotte drove by in her expensive car, slowing down to watch. But this time there was no anger in her face, just a hint of wistfulness, as if she finally understood what real love looked like. Regina, Marcus said when it was time for the vows, I spent 25 years thinking success meant having the biggest office, the most expensive car, the perfect image. But true success was standing right here on this street corner, making people happy with hot dogs and kind words. You taught me that love isn't about what you have, it's about who you are. And I promise to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of your love. Regina wiped away tears as she began her own vows. Marcus, when you came back into my life, I was scared. Scared to trust again, scared to love again. But you showed me that some loves are worth the risk. You didn't try to change my world, you became part of it. And I promise to spend the rest of my life sharing that world with you. By the power vested in me, Reverend Williams said, his voice thick with emotion, and by the state of Illinois, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Their first kiss as a married couple was interrupted by cheers and the sound of hot dog cart bells ringing. All the local vendors had brought their carts to celebrate. At the reception, held in the park nearby, Hot dogs were served alongside champagne. Eleanor Stone was seen eating one with extra mustard, actually smiling as she got some on her designer dress. "Your mother's enjoying the hot dogs," Regina whispered to Marcus as they danced. "Everyone enjoys your hot dogs," Marcus replied. "That's why our first franchise opens next month." Regina looked around at their strange but perfect wedding. Her daughters were dancing with Marcus's business partners. Her father was telling stories to Marcus's mother. Two worlds that had once seemed so far apart had somehow merged into one beautiful family. "Did you ever think we'd end up here?" She asked Marcus. "That day when you first saw me at the cart?" "No," he admitted. "I thought I'd lost my chance with you forever. But you know what? Sometimes life gives you a second chance at your first love." Speaking of second chances, Regina smiled mysteriously. "I have something to tell you." Marcus looked at her questioningly. "Tracy did a blood test for me last week," Regina said softly. "We're going to have a baby." Marcus's eyes filled with tears. "Really? But I thought, at our age..." "God works in mysterious ways," Regina quoted her father. "Looks like your mother's going to get that grandchild she's been hinting about." Marcus pulled her closer, not caring who was watching. "I love you," he whispered. "Hot dogs and all." "I love you too," Regina laughed. "Designer suits and all." As the sun set over Chicago, casting a golden glow over the celebrating crowd, Regina and Marcus danced slowly by her hot dog cart. The words "just married" had been painted where "gold digger" had once been sprayed. 25 years was a long time to wait for a happy ending. But as Regina looked up at Marcus, she knew some loves were worth waiting for. Sometimes the heart knows what it wants, even if it takes the mind a little longer to figure it out. And sometimes the simplest things, like a hot dog cart on a busy street corner, can lead to the greatest love stories of all. "Ready to go home?" Marcus asked as the party wound down. Regina looked at their mixed family, at her cart, at the life they'd built together. "I am home," she said simply. And she was right. Home wasn't a penthouse or a mansion or even her small house. Home was wherever they were together, whether it was serving hot dogs on a street corner or dancing at their wedding. Because sometimes love comes back around, better and stronger than before. Sometimes what looks like an ending is really just a beginning. And sometimes, just sometimes, hot dogs and champagne make the perfect combination.